I want to touch a little bit more on the philosophical underpinnings of the comprehensive sex education movement and where it's all going, and the mentality of the radicals behind it. Between the provincial liberals of Kathleen Wynne and the federal liberals of Justin Trudeau, they're building a structure around us, kind of a legal machine that has four walls and a roof that appears to be closing in. And between the various assaults on our rights, on our fundamental rights and freedoms as parents and as citizens in this country, you know, we have from the radical sex education that is sexualizing our innocent children, to Bill 28, which was mentioned earlier by others, which erases the term mother and father and creates a situation where a child can have four legal parents. Crazy, insane stuff. Bill 89, which threatens to take your biological children away from you if you disagree with transgender identity theory. And then there's the spanking. The federal liberals now are working on an anti-spanking bill that will turn regular parents who use corporal discipline, amongst other tools for discipline of their children, into criminals. So you'll go to jail. It'll be a criminal code punishment. So Justin Trudeau is working on that. So they're closing the net around us. This cage, this structure they built around us is both an impenetrable fortress and a prison from which there is no escape for our children and our families. And, excuse me. So, you know, it's a fortress in the sense that no ideas that contradict the liberal government's own view of sexuality is allowed in. It cannot penetrate. So if you believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, or that mothers and fathers are irreplaceable to children, and that the nuclear family is the best, the optimal solution for children and for the next generation of citizenry, that is not allowed into the liberal fortress. That idea cannot be tolerated, will not be tolerated. And at the same time, with all these policies, the sex ed curriculum, which permeates you know, the entire sexual ideology, the gender identity theory, it permeates every subject in every grade now. There's no escape. You cannot escape. Your children cannot, they're not allowed to escape the influence of these liberal policies and regulations and laws. And we have the example as well where, you know, they'll even use the courts to enforce it. Government-funded lawyers are being used by Kathleen Wynne and the liberals to ensure that no child escapes their radical sexual indoctrination. We have the case in Hamilton. The Hamilton father, Steve Terlucas in Hamilton, who is suing, he has been suing his school board for something like 6 years now, just to be told in advance what his children are being taught about sexuality. He's been in court now for 6 years. Kathleen Wynne sends 2 lawyers to every court hearing, government-funded lawyers that we pay for, to argue that he has no right to know what his children are being taught about sexuality. Shame. The teachers union, the Elementary Teachers Federation, is lockstep in union with the liberal government in this indoctrination agenda. They also send 2 lawyers to court every time. Shame. And of course, the government-funded Hamilton Public School Board sends 2 government-funded lawyers. So we're paying for 6 lawyers. And poor Steve Terlucas has to scrimp and save and beg for pennies from parents like you to pay for 1 lawyer at an extremely discount rate. So this liberal fortress, this impenetrable fortress, and a prison from which none can escape is closing in, and their intention is to destroy the family. These people are cultural Marxists. I want to explain that a little bit in a bit. But they want to destroy the family. They want to de-Christianize society. And they're using the classroom to do it. What a great propaganda tool. If you own this current generation, they learn their philosophical, moral, and religious and spiritual beliefs from the state. You own the future. They are going to be our future managers and human resource department directors and teachers and professors in universities and politicians. So this is their final conquest in the cultural Marxist revolution. So the beating heart of this government's propaganda machine is early childhood sex education. And it initiates, as we've heard, children as young as 6 years old into sexual thinking and adult sexual concepts. The sex ed, as you know, encourages sexual exploration in grade school, detaches sex from love and marriage, and creates the impression in the minds of young children, by design, that sex is a casual thing you do purely for recreation, purely for pleasure, which has nothing to do with love or marriage or family or procreating children. The government curriculum also encourages children actively to masturbate as a means of sexual discovery, as a great tool for sexual discovery. And in so doing, it's very clever. What they're also doing is promoting pornography use. Because if you think about it for half a second, when people or young people or whoever are masturbating, what are they doing? They're using pornography. They're using pornography to masturbate, of course, to fuel their fantasies. And so what we have is the outrageous situation, the unbelievable situation, where the Liberal government is encouraging the use of pornography to children through the back door by encouraging masturbation. And at the same time, they have the nerve to claim through the dishonest media that this curriculum is about protecting children from the dangers of the internet. The exact opposite is what they're doing. They're pushing children onto the internet to get hooked on pornography. The sex curriculum is also very medically and physically dangerous to children, and actually endangers their physical lives, because it equates anal sex with normal vaginal intercourse, and hides from children, literally hides the facts that anal sex has a 3,000% higher incidence of contracting HIV, which can become AIDS and is still a uniformly fatal disease. They're hiding the fact that it's 430 times greater risk of catching HIV and AIDS through anal sex versus normal vaginal intercourse. So they hide these facts from children. And then they downplay it in a section on HIV. It actually gives a distinct impression to children that it's not really a big deal if you have HIV. You can still have a, quote, near to normal life. And this, of course, the agenda here is they want everyone to have free sex. So even if you have HIV AIDS and you could kill somebody else by having sex with them, you have a right to sex, to sexual expression. And this is embedded subtly into the curriculum. This is all around a dangerous, radical sexual ideology that is concocted by very demented people, in many cases perverted people. Yes. There's a collection of perverts like Ben Levin who want to groom our children. They want to lower our children's natural inhibitions with regards to sex to make them more open to sex. And so there's that agenda as well. But I want to talk a little bit about the cultural Marxist agenda that's driving this as well. Now, and I'll touch on that in a second. How many people here have heard that there are now, it has been discovered by LifeSite News through a tip from a teacher, that at least 5 school boards now in Ontario, 5 public school boards, have implemented a policy which directs teachers to help children transition in the classroom to another sex and to hide it from parents. How many people have heard that? So the policy actually states that teachers are not allowed to tell parents that they are helping, that the school is helping their children transition to another gender, to the opposite sex, unless the child gives explicit permission to tell the parents. So they're doing this behind parents' backs. And it's unbelievable. On the face of it, it's bizarre, because, I've got here with me the American Psychiatric Association's official Diagnostic and Statistics Manual on Mental Disorders, the DSM-5. And in it, it still lists gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder as it used to be called, as a mental disorder. So what our government is telling us, what our schools now increasingly are telling us, is that they have an obligation to get children to embrace their mental disorder. Not to seek help from it, not to get help to accept who they really are, to accept their bodily reality, to have harmony and peace with their own bodies, their perfectly healthy bodies, but instead to embrace their fantasy, to embrace the mental disorder that afflicts them. Now that is not helping children. That is child abuse. That is very aggressive, a very serious form of child abuse. And all the more when you consider, as Queenie, you mentioned earlier, that she mentioned at least up to 80% of children, naturally, if you just leave them alone, if the government would just leave them alone, they would grow up in adolescence and accept their bodily reality. In this book, it says up to 95%. Wow. The American Psychiatric Association says it's up to 95% of children, if you just leave them alone, will sort out their gender confusion and accept their bodily reality.
Leave them alone!
Leave the kids alone!
Leave the kids alone.
No interference from the teachers.
And you know, and there's also many physical harms as well. When you know, this is how crazy it is. There's a Professor John Whitehall, the Foundation Chair of Pediatrics and Health in Australia, who's written at the School of Medicine at the University of Western Sydney, and he's written several papers on exposing in a very simple way just how physically and psychologically harmful this whole sex change transgenderism movement is to children. You know, he points out that the International Endocrine Society cautions that we don't know what puberty blockers do exactly in the long term, and that they may cause cognitive problems.
Oh my gosh.
That's cognitive problems in your mind, structural brain problems that affect your ability to think, your ability to even your memory retention, and there's other you know, cancer risks, etc. of puberty blockers, sterilization. You know, how is a 10 or 11-year-old child supposed to have informed consent to say, yes, I want to be put on puberty blockers, which may render me sterile? Is a 10-year-old child, an 11-year-old child, a 12-year-old child really going to understand the ramifications of their decision to make a truly informed consent decision to say that I never want to have children at 10 years old? Of course not. This is child abuse. And why is that? There are more voices speaking out against this whole gender identity theory, this radical indoctrination of gender identity theory. One of them is a renowned lesbian activist and feminist hero, a feminist heroine, Camille Paglia, in the United States. She's very intelligent, highly intelligent, and she would disagree with much of what Campaign Life Coalition believes in. She would disagree with our stance on natural marriage, that marriage is between one man and one woman, and that it's necessary for the good of society. She would disagree with that, and the importance of the nuclear family. She has studied the evidence for gender identity theory and the people behind it, and she calls it child abuse. She calls it child abuse. And here's a quote from Camille Paglia, this lesbian feminist activist. I personally believe that anyone who collaborates in an intrusion into a developing child's body and mind is guilty of child abuse. A crime against humanity. Because that child is not prepared to make such a decision. End quote. It's very interesting as well. Camille Paglia has been interviewed a couple of times where she has talked about, and she claims in these interviews, that transgenderism is a symptom of cultural collapse that occurs in the late or decadent phases of culture, and that this can be observed throughout history, throughout various advanced civilizations. And here's a direct quote from her. The more I explored it, I realized that historically, this movement towards androgyny, which she's comparing to transgenderism, occurs in late phases of culture as a civilization starts to unravel. As the civilization starts to unravel. And she goes on to say, my overview of history, in my noticing that in late phases of these societies, you saw all of a sudden yet a proliferation of homosexuality, of sadomasochism, of gender games, impersonations, and masks. Western culture is in decline. There's absolutely no doubt about that. In my view, looking at the history of Egypt, Babylon, and Roman Byzantium, and so on. End quote. From Camille Paglia, a very famous lesbian and feminist activist who agrees with parents on this issue. So it's important that we continue to expose this. And one lesson I want to leave, and I want to encourage everyone here, all the parents here, is sometimes I hear people on our side of the equation, Christians and others, say, well, the government has good intentions. The government means well. We all want to do best for our children. That's not true. Don't ever say that. These Marxists, these radicals do not care about the best interests of children. No. They don't care. These children are pawns in their sexual revolution. It's a war, it's a revolution to them. And the children, if they commit suicide later in life because they've gone down the path of transgenderism, and of course it's known to be associated with a 19 times greater incidence of suicide when you have a sex change operation, they don't care. Kathleen Wynne and the liberal radicals pushing this, and the Marxists and socialists, they don't care. They don't have good intentions. They're not like us. They don't just have a different interpretation. They are out to destroy society. They're out to destroy the family. And really, a lot of it comes out of hostility towards religion. In particular, hostility towards Christianity. They hate God, they hate the idea of God, and they want to de-Christianize society.
Lord have mercy.
Now, these are cultural Marxists. The Soviet Marxists of the Bolshevik Revolution, the Proletariat Revolution, which birthed socialism and communism, used the excuse of economic and political revolution in order to wage war against the Judeo-Christian society. They wanted to eradicate belief in God. The Soviets, the communists, the Marxists, and the socialists. And they wanted the state to replace God. And this was something that was acknowledged by St. John Paul II as well, that this was one of the things that the communists wanted, to replace God with the state as the almighty power, to whom all loyalty, faith, and obedience is given. Now these cultural Marxists today, they changed tactics. The purely economic class warfare where they pitted the proletariat, which was the working class, against the factory owners, that's passé. You can't really argue that too well anymore, especially seeing what happened to Soviet communism, where it just introduced poverty and famine and mass murder on a massive scale. So they've changed tactics. So they're still pitting one class against another. It used to be the proletariat workers against the factory owners. Now it's the so-called oppressed LGBTQ people against the Christians who keep them oppressed, and so many other identity group politics as well. So this is the game that they're playing, is this identity group politics. And what they want is to kill God, the idea of God in society, and to finally be liberated from his control over humanity. As the philosopher Jean Paul Sartre, I believe it was, said, if God exists, man cannot be free. And that's what these cultural Marxists like Kathleen Wynne believe. And that is what they're after. That is what they're after. They want to hook our kids on sex at an early age because they understand that by attacking Christian sexual ethics, they destroy the family. And with it, they destroy the church. They destroy Christianity as well. Because the church can only exist if the domestic church, which is each family unit, and that collection of family units becomes the church. And they understand this. These clever Marxists, these socialists who have concocted this sex ed curriculum and all these other policies that are anti-parent, they understand this. And they are out to destroy families and tear down society to rebuild this new Marxist society where the elites, the ones who are really smart, not us stupid people, they run everything.
Same.
These people, as I said, do not care about healthy relationships or physical or emotional health. They only care about their revolution, erasing the moral boundaries set by a Western society built upon Judeo-Christian foundations. They are driven by a hatred of God, whether they believe he exists or not. We have seen this mentality in the person of Joseph Stalin. Now, Stalin was the Soviet communist dictator who for 30 years ruled the Soviet Union and was responsible for up to 60 million murdered people and starved people. A real monster, a monstrosity of a man. And his daughter related the story that on his deathbed, he suddenly sat up upright, shook his fist at the heavens, at a God that he claimed did not exist, and then fell back and died. His last moments. So right to the bitter end, this Soviet communist Marxist leader was driven by a hatred and a hostility towards God. and right to the very moment of his passing. And it's helpful to understand that our cultural Marxists today, like Kathleen Wynne and others, Ben Levin and others, they subscribe to the same philosophy. I want to encourage people to continue. It's so important what you're doing here as the Durham Concerned Parents Group. You're continuing to stand up for our rights. You're continuing to stand up for your rights. Stand up for our children. We've got to be persistent. There's nothing like persistence.
Yes.
Be persistent. Continue to fight to educate others, to protect your children, and pray as well for God to raise up saints.
Yes.
You know, throughout history, there's been many dark times. In the 4th century, most of the bishops in the world believed a heresy, the Arian heresy, that was totally anti-Christian, and yet God raised up saints that brought back civilization, brought back the rest of society. And you know, we see that in you know, so many people have been praying to help protect our children against the whole gender identity theory revolution, this crazy transgender wave that's rolling over us all. And you know, I've been praying that for many years for people to stand up. Who's going to stand up and help us lead against this? And what happens? Along comes Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Yes.
Dr. Jordan Peterson, who I don't even know if he's a Christian, if he's really a man of faith. He might not be. I don't know. But he came out of nowhere in answer to prayer to so many people and started speaking with his intelligence, with the power of his word, to wake up tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to the danger and insanity of gender identity theory. And there are many more people who have now been red-pilled. They're now awake. They now see the evil and see the harm to our children that this whole transgender movement brings about.